as well. Okay, good day everyone. Thanks for joining.
It's like, you know how they regrow legs and that.
Make sure everyone's got their cameras off and so on. So, g'day, welcome. Thanks for joining us this evening. So, I'm delighted to say I'm here with Peter Gavalas from Perth. So, Peter, welcome.
Thanks, Pete. Good to be on board.
Cool. So, I guess let me just see if I can. I've got some slides up here. So, let's just see. Can you see my screen okay there, Pete?
Yep, definitely.
Cool. Great. Okay. Well, thanks for joining tonight. So we've got an hour. We probably won't go for quite as long as that. So I guess what we're going to cover today is it's a Perth property market update. There's a bit going on, to say the least, this year, and we just thought it'd be really useful to get some local insights. We get a lot of stuff in the media about what's happening in the economy, what's happening in property markets. You know, when is Perth going to turn the corner? Is it set for a boom? But I guess a lot of this stuff is written by economists who've probably never been to Perth, let alone got local insights. And I've always found the best leading indicators really is to speak to mortgage brokers who see what's coming first because they're at the coalface, and then buyers agents who can tell you exactly what is happening on the ground. And also just maybe sometimes in the property management space, because the rental market now is getting really tight in parts of Perth. So it's always good to get some real insights from people who are actually living and breathing property day to day. So just by way of a very brief intro, I'm Pete Wargent from buyersbuyers.com.au, and we are a national aggregator for buyers agent services. I'm delighted to say we've got Peter with us today, over from WA. So I thought just we won't spend too long on the intro, but Peter, if you could give us just a little bit of background about how you got into buyers agency, a little bit about the services that you guys offer, and also what kind of areas you cover in WA as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Pete. So yeah, I've come from a engineering background, been an investor in my own property portfolio for the past 20 years. I've done things like develop my own sort of projects, some land subdivision as well. My father was a developer for many years, so I've been involved in property for quite a long time and seen what works, seen what doesn't work. So I think it puts me in a good position to try and help people. I think over the past 20 or 30 years, I've noticed what things have worked well, what hasn't worked well, things that we need to look for. In that respect, I'm able to help people now try and position themselves a bit better going forward, and what type of investments to make, and type of property, and about the strategies as well. Getting those strategies right is really important, because if you get the wrong strategy and you make the wrong mistakes, then it can really put you back and it can stop you in your portfolio, that's for sure.
Yeah, totally. So you guys run a buyer's agency in Perth, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. So I help owner occupiers, investors, do a little bit of work with some developers as well. So yeah, owner occupiers, it's all about finding the right properties. At the moment, it's very tough in Perth finding good family homes, very, very low listings. So these properties are going really quickly, the ones that are well priced at least anyway. So it's about finding good value and A-grade property as well, and jumping onto those really quickly, appraising them and putting offers in.
Yeah, it seems to be a common theme we're seeing all around the country this year. I mean, stock levels are naturally low because Melbourne's been in a lockdown, but right across the country, really, listings have been low this year. First, because there was a lack of confidence in March and April when there was a lot of uncertainty. But now buyers are coming back and listings are just being absorbed quicker than they can be brought to market. And especially in some of the economies that have been less affected by COVID, there's just not much stock around. Do you get many buyers and investors from interstate, or are they mainly local?
Look, it has changed in the past probably 2 months. It was mainly local before that. Now I'm getting inquiries from eastern states. Recently bought quite a few properties for first home buyers from eastern states. They work remotely, so they're looking at relocating from eastern states to Perth because it's much cheaper. Interstate buyers who can't afford to buy in their local market are looking at other markets, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide. Also dealing with people overseas as well who are actually working for Australian companies but are working overseas. So they're also looking into Perth at the moment. So I've noticed the inquiries from investors has changed quite a lot over the last month or two.
Yeah, I think that's something else I've heard a lot from buyers agents and mortgage brokers. It probably hasn't shown up yet in the statistics, but I think a lot of investors are looking at it and saying, okay, well, this thing is going to clear out of the way next year. We've got investors borrowing from under 3% mortgage rates and sometimes near at 2.5%. And I think as confidence returns, obviously the budget's going to throw some more fuel onto the property market. Now, I think certainly there's a lot more investors now starting to think very seriously about getting back in. And I imagine with Perth being probably the least, well, arguably one of the least impacted cities by the virus this year, especially because of the point of the cycle at which Perth is in, then potentially investors could be very interested. And I think as well, as you said, especially from Hong Kong, there'll be a lot of expats thinking about Western Australia now. It's obviously done very well this year in terms of managing the crisis, but also the mining investment is making a comeback and so on. I was so if you've got any questions today, by the way, feel free to drop them into the chat box. You can enter your questions here. See if I can actually type. There we go. So if you've got any questions for people, either cover them as we go through, or we can actually cover them off at the end as well. I've somehow managed to delete my slide there, which I just had up on the the figures that were out today from NAB, but I can just walk you through those anyway. It was very interesting to see that NAB puts out its consumer confidence surveys, which I guess is for the economy, they're the most timely indicators we've got. A lot of the statistics are obviously months out of date and they only really tell you what's already happened. But the NAB surveys are probably the most timely, and confidence is still pretty low in Sydney and Melbourne and in many parts of the country. But in WA, things are really, really heating up. Business conditions are almost at boom time levels, and confidence is following on from that. What do you think is driving that? But is that gold and iron ore mining and maybe the housing market reaching the bottom of the cycle? Is it mainly a mining story?
Look, I think the Perth market started recovery November last year, and obviously COVID put a bit of a pause to that for a few months. And I think now we're just seeing that a lot of pent up demand, a lot of people have saved a lot of money over the past few years, so they're probably the confidence in the market is bringing people out into the market now. Obviously, with the resources as well, it's definitely a bonus. There's a lot more employment. Wages are starting to push up again. So I think we're seeing across the board, we're seeing some really good positive signs all around.
Yeah, I think it's always one thing that's particularly relevant to WA, what's happening to the price of iron ore being just such an enormous part of the export economy there. And it was really in the doldrums post mining boom years. And then suddenly with China's economy getting back up and running, they're buying iron ore at a record pace. Prices are sky high. Aussie dollars low. There's so many things that are just lining up there for Perth. I think to tie it back to property more specifically, obviously it's been an awkward few years for Australian property in general, not least because we had a banking royal commission. Then we had, there was a regulatory credit squeeze on interest-only lending, which made property a lot less attractive to a lot of investors, higher mortgage rates on interest-only loans. But there was also an election last year, which there was a lot of mooted changes to tax policy, which just let a lot of investors just stood back and thought, let's just wait and see what happens here. So at the national level, prices kind of just they've sort of gone down, they've come back a bit post-election, but essentially haven't really gone anywhere for a few years. Just one thing that caught my eye was just the divergence between what's happened between house prices and unit prices nationally. Is that something you've seen a bit of in WA? Are units, have they been struggling a bit this year with all of the various stuff that's been going on and people looking for more space?
Yeah, I have found that the biggest demand has been houses and family homes are the big demand. So 3x2, 4x2 homes are really, really in strong demand. So I think you find with the units, because a lot of investors over the past sort of 5 years who have bought into Perth haven't done that well. Some are behind. So I think we're seeing a lot of people selling some investment properties that bought over the past few years. So they're probably just taking some money out and moving it elsewhere or cashing up a bit. So I'm seeing a lot of this sort of 2x1, 3x1 kind of 3x2 units, strata homes, those kind of things are coming on board. Yeah. But
yeah, that seems to be a common theme really all around the country. I think Sydney and Melbourne especially have been very overbuilt for inner city apartments. Just on the property cycle there that you touched on. So obviously it's interesting to consider. I was rereading a book from about 20 years ago on Australian real estate, and it made the point that of all the cities, Perth didn't seem to have the boom bust cycle. It was just a steady performer, which is quite interesting to read in hindsight, because since that time, everybody has known the resources capitals to be the more volatile cities, because we went through a once in a 120-year mining boom. I guess that would be the big reason behind it. Obviously, things went really well. They went very, very strong for Perth from 2003, I guess, at least on these numbers, up to about 2007, with prices comfortably doubling and then some. And then we had a second wind, but I guess it's been well publicised in the media since the peak of the mining boom. Things have just, there hasn't been a crash as such, but prices have just deflated gradually, I guess, over a number of years. Is that the kind of experience you're seeing from most people in Perth and WA?
Yeah, so I mean, the Perth market peaked in sort of 2014. And since then, it's probably been, most of Perth has probably dropped around 20%. Some markets have remained sort of constant, but a lot of them have dropped sort of about 20%. So if you've bought between 2012 to 14, you're probably a bit behind the eight ball at the moment. And we're seeing that, I'm buying properties at the moment, and look at the last sale in 2012, and it's 20-30% down. It's crazy.
Yeah, I suppose the interesting thing there is that we've seen modest inflation since that time, but in real terms that puts prices 30% cheaper, or in some cases more. But the other thing that's happened is it wasn't uncommon for people to have fairly punchy mortgage rates at the peak of the mining boom, but these days, interest rates have been cut 5 times in 12 months. So from a serviceability point of view, Perth property now is right back to what you'd expect to have seen back in the 1980s, in terms of the share of income that it takes to service a mortgage. So now, obviously, a big part of that is lower interest rates, and that might not persist. But from an affordability point of view, it's obviously become considerably more attractive over the past 6, 7, 8 years. Are you seeing more first home buyers coming back in, driven by the incentives?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of first home buyers. I think that's the incentives have bought out. People have been sort of looking at investing in property, first home buyers, in the next couple of years, and it's bought them out a bit earlier, I think. People sitting at home with mum and dad, saving some money or renting, because the incentives are so good, it's just too hard to pass up on. And you can get house and land packages from around $400,000. So depending on where you're going. So yeah, look, it's it'd be crazy not to take up all those opportunities. I'd do it if I could.
Yeah,
I was the first time.
It's and I think certainly if you look at what's coming in the budget, another 10,000 places for first home buyers, the government is just as happened during the Rudd stimulus, clearly going to try and push people away from rental towards ownership, and that will support the market from the bottom up. I think what I would like to do is just come on and look at some more specifics for Perth, because people like myself, we often we follow what's going on with the Perth economy, but I get over to WA less regularly than I would like to. It would be good to get some more specifics from you in terms of what people should be looking to buy at various price points and the kind of areas that you favour. I think just to cover off on the economy points, obviously the unemployment rate has spiked this year, but I was interested to see this week when the ABS put out its job vacancies figures. I mean, WA now is getting back best job vacancies in 7 or 8 years. So obviously the mining story and the lack of impact from COVID means that the stimulus from the government is really helping in Perth. In Sydney and Melbourne, things have gone a long way to get back to where they were. And the other thing that just caught my mind this week, as you already touched on there, there's just not much stock to sell. So as you get more buyers coming back in, that's clearly going to support prices. So before we just pick look at some of your favourite suburbs, there's two things that I wanted to explore with you. One we've already touched on the inner city unit market, but I've been following with interest the vacancy rate numbers for WA, and I saw a headline this week that Perth is heading into rental crisis territory. And certainly, looking at these numbers, I mean, this is just headline stuff, but we've gone from a vacancy rate of 5% from at the peak of the last cycle, when we got this big overhang of stock as the population growth slowed post-mining boom. But now it's being absorbed at a furious pace, and vacancy rates, if they keep dropping like that, they'll be just like Hobart was a few years ago. They're going to be getting down towards zero. Is that what you're seeing in the local housing market?
No, definitely. So, I mean, the vacancy rate of Perth currently sits at 1.3%. And the listings are getting absorbed within 19 days on average. Some suburbs I'm seeing, there might be 30 or 40 people going to one home open for rentals. So it's only going to be a matter of time before those prices are pushing up higher. I think the vacant properties are going to see some increase in rental prices. Obviously, the ones that are already got tenants in them, we can't have an increase due to the emergency restrictions are placed on rentals. But come end of March next year, that will start seeing rent prices go up and yields go up as well throughout all of Perth.
Yeah, it's interesting to reflect, because I remember a lot of those British TV shows from 10 years ago where they would be looking for properties for new migrants to Perth, and there would be, for every property there was 40 buyers and 50 people at an open home, and that crazy sort of cyclical peak that you can sometimes see in property. And it sounds like from various media reports that's what's starting to happen now in the rental market. It's interesting because most of the other cities have got this issue with oversupply. I was looking through my travel diaries and Facebook posts and all the like, and I haven't actually been over to Perth for some time. My younger brother used to live there, just teaching at the school there near Cottesloe. Beautiful part of the world. What about certainly in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, we've seen a lot of these new apartment towers went up since 2012, largely being sold to Chinese investors in those cities. Has Perth seen anything similar, or has it been less of an issue because the market was already beyond the peak when all of that started?
Yeah, look, around some of the premium areas, there are some new apartment buildings going up and towers. And they're quite popular still with overseas investors or holiday houses. I think in the outer suburbs, where we started seeing a few years ago, we started seeing some apartments go up. They've all a lot of those blocks are now being sold by developers. They're divesting out of that product, so they're obviously seeing there's not much demand there. So yeah, it's only specific to the sort of more premium end, I think. Close to the river, close to the ocean, yeah, those kind of ones. But apart from that, the unit sales have been pretty sort of slow in Perth. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. I think a lot of the money from the Chinese mainland was very heavily focused on Melbourne and Sydney, and to a third extent, parts of southeast Queensland, but probably less so in Perth. So might not had the same issues to the same extent. I think all of the indicators in terms of the economy, vacancy rates, interest rates, everything's lining up seemingly very nicely for Western Australia now after a tough 6 or 7 years. Tell us a bit about the Perth property market for people who are unfamiliar like myself, because like a lot of people, when I come over to the city, most often I go to the cafes in Fremantle, and then I do a bit of the tourism stuff, and then go to Cottesloe Beach. But I don't really know the city, and which are the sort of more favoured areas, and where is some of the best buying, just at a high level?
Yeah. So look, I'm noticing pretty strong demand, obviously, between the $400,000 to $900,000 price range. That stuff seems to be sort of selling really, really quickly in the right areas. Places like sort of Como, Manning, Kensington, Doubleview, anything close to the sort of city, river and ocean in affordable areas are going really, really quickly. Multiple offers, selling sort of the first home open as well. Western suburbs have shown a really strong increase. Mosman Park, Nedlands, Dalkeith, all those sort of areas are showing some really strong growth, and then mainly from expats coming back to Perth. I think they look at those areas as a safe haven and premium areas. So yeah, a lot of people are finding those quite good. I do like a lot of the northern corridor. So areas like Belden, Heathridge, Greenwood, Duncraig, they're quite strong. A lot of demand for family homes. Kingsley as well, really strong. Another one in there. So you find anything that's sort of close to the ocean, city is quite strong. South of the river as well, there's some really good opportunities in there as well. Places like Baldivis, 0.6% vacancy rate at the moment. Yields are sort of 5 or 6%, and they're actually like the last house I bought there about 3 weeks ago. We're seeing sort of 8 or 9 offers per property. It's crazy.
Yeah, it kind of does make sense when you look at it through the lens of somebody who spends a lot of time in Sydney, where 7, 8, 900,000, you're very often in the premium areas looking at 1-bed apartments. Maybe if you're prepared to compromise, you might look at a 2-bed apartment, but it's obviously a completely different proposition now for Perth. I think if you think back to before Sydney's boom, which kicked off around 2012, a lot of the Australian capitals had very similar prices: Canberra, Perth, Sydney, Melbourne. But obviously since that time, they've diverged a lot, and Sydney has effectively doubled over that time, while Perth has got cheaper. So suddenly that price differential is now huge. But I guess there was a period there where people were migrating away from WA, back from whence they came post-mining boom. But that seems to have stopped now, and it's actually, the economy is picking up in WA, and people are thinking, well, obviously it's a great lifestyle city to live in, and much, much more affordable now comparative to Sydney. So what kind of areas do the first home buyers generally look in?
Yeah, so I'll touch on that migration. You mentioned that about migration. So between 2009 to 2015 or 16, we had around average around 20,000 people migrating to Perth every year. From about 2016 to 2019, that dropped to around sort of under 5,000. At the moment, we're seeing there's a cap on migration at 500 per week. So, and that's going to be lifted to 1,000 a week. So all of a sudden, you've got this massive migration influx that's currently, we're tracking at around 25,000 a year, which is boom levels. And we're going to see that lifted to 1,000, which is going to be around 50,000 a year, which is enormous.
Well, that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because Sydney and Melbourne have been running at extremely high levels of immigration since 2012, and the government's really pushed international students and temporary visas. There's been a lot of holiday visitors and tourism. But Perth, I guess, that was a slow period for migration. And yet here we are now as we emerge from COVID. I don't think there's been a local case since April or something. So it's, it's clearly going to be very highly favoured by people wanting to immigrate or to migrate over the next year or two. And as you said, it's been less impacted by the slowdown because it wasn't, it wasn't running at full speed like Sydney and Melbourne beforehand. And yet we've got suddenly potentially all of this pent-up demand from new entrants to Australia and potentially from interstate as well as people move away from Melbourne and Sydney. So there's a lot of stars aligning there and not much actual stock for sale on the market. So it could be pretty interesting. If you were an investor from interstate wanting to capitalize on that, what kind of areas, if you had, say, a 500 or a 750 budget, what would be the best use of that? Would you try to find a house somewhere in a reasonably commutable kind of location?
Yeah, look, in those kind of price ranges, it gives you quite a good broad selection in Perth. So I'd probably stick to somewhere north of the river, close to the train station, because north of the river you've got you're close to sort of the ocean. So you've got sort of some areas like double views are quite popular. It's close to Scarborough. Scarborough is going to be a massive sort of development over the next few years. Scarborough is equivalent to Bondi Beach, I guess, in Sydney. So there's going to see quite a lot of development, a lot of high rise around there. So there's going to be a lot of demand around those areas.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear you say Scarborough, because that's one of the areas I've been very interested in over the years. It seems to have a nice balance of proximity to water and the city and decent connection into the CBD area for work and stuff. And certainly for somebody who's spent a lot of time looking at prices in London and Sydney, it doesn't seem too unreasonable to me.
No, I think it's great value. I mean, you can buy a nice executive home in Scarborough, 2 streets from the beach for under $1 million. It's it's really good. It's really good buying, I think.
Even compared to Noosa, that sounds pretty bloody good to me. But sign of the times, I guess. If you buy at the bottom of the cycle instead of the top. You mentioned there the yields. Rental yields seem to be heading up in WA. This is just a national figure that CommBank threw together. But if you look at where mortgage rates are heading, presumably for investors, the cash flow now is going to be, if not neutral or if not positive cash flow, it's going to be pretty close to break even, presumably.
No, definitely, because I mean, the average for Perth is 4.3% for houses and 5.2% for units.
Yeah, okay.
And there's quite a few areas within that 4 to 5% range, which is some really good, some good sort of family homes within the sort of 15 kilometres of the city, 15 to 20 kilometres of the city. So some really good buying opportunities there. 3x2, 4x2 family homes in good areas. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
and the other thing that came up, and I think it's so this is actually something, if you look on our website at Buyers, we put out some of this. It's our website here, buyersbuyers.com.au. We do actually put out a lot of market research, and if you look at Western Australia, this is one of the interesting pieces of research we found in recent months, is that it actually now, in all parts of Perth, it is now actually, from a cash flow perspective, it is actually cheaper now to be a property owner than it is to be a renter. Now, obviously, there's a lot of moving parts there in terms of stamp duty and repairs and so on, but just at the macro level. And
Yeah.
I think if you look at it historically, certainly for Australia's capital cities, whenever it becomes cheaper to buy than rent, and then if the government throws in some first home buyer incentives, you just see this big swing of people saying, well, why wouldn't I buy if it's actually cheaper than renting? It's not necessarily the case in every part of the country, but certainly in Perth, even in some cases when you're paying down the principal as well, it's actually cheaper. It's only really in the inner city where there's been a cash flow to take into account. So I think, wherever you get that dynamic in a capital city, it's generally very supportive for housing activity and prices. So I think, we've done webinars all around the country, Canberra, Adelaide, Brisbane and Sydney, Melbourne. And I mean, when you look at the fundamentals for Perth, it's probably the most interesting of all the cities at the moment, just because of where it sits in the cycle. So definitely check out our website there, by the way, because we've got there's heaps of stuff here you can get for free in terms of free research. For we've got reports for every part of Western Australia, suburbs, property valuations. So just anytime you want to check it out there, that's our website, buyersbuyers.com.au. And I've seen it's interesting to see how quickly the media sentiment has been shifting, because it was only sort of February and March time when we're thinking, we've got this global pandemic, there's a plague, and what might happen. Now the government very quickly moved with its stimulus, the JobKeeper and JobSeeker, home builder measures, first home buyer stimulus. I think in Sydney and Melbourne that was really needed, but for parts of the country like Perth, where there wasn't really much impact from COVID, I mean, things could really take off now. And even, I mean, this is a few weeks out of date now, but see, suddenly prices for Perth predicted to go up 18%, and arguably pretty conservative as things open up again. So in terms of, is that what you're hearing from people locally, Peter?
No, definitely. So Bernard Salt, I think, even come out and said that he's expecting WA to have a positive over the next 5 years. So between now and 2025, expect to be extremely positive. So I think it's all around the place. I mean, all the banks now have a positive impact or a positive outlook for Perth. So dealing with a lot of banks, I'm finding that, they've changed in the past few months, that's for sure.
I think there'll be some residual issues, I think, from particularly in things like Melbourne CBD and Sydney CBD, where I think if people had student apartments and in some cases where people bought off the plan in the last year or two in the actual CBD towers, well, there could be some issues there in terms of rental vacancies and mortgage deferrals, but it seems to be far less of an issue in a lot of the tier 2 capitals, and especially Perth and WA. And a lot of the statistics are showing, well, in fact, of all of the states, everywhere saw a drop in jobs through April. Well, everyone worked out what was going on, but WA now is almost back to where things were pre-COVID and trending up by the week. I mean, these figures only go to August, so I would say probably looking at the vacancies figures, job vacancies, things are probably well and truly back to where they were and then some. So overall, it's probably of all the webinars we've done, you look at Perth and WA, and it seems like a pretty healthy outlook for Western Australia overall.
Yeah, absolutely. So touching on the capital city vacancy rates, so interesting to note that the vacancy rate for Perth CBD is currently sitting at 5.5%. That's at the end of August. So again, you're probably seeing a lot of the, international students who aren't here. Probably a lot of tourists, less tourists around at the moment. Probably a lot of that is Airbnb property, units, apartments, type of thing. So But I think we'll expect to see that change. But it's quite surprising when you look at 1.3% for Perth as a median, and the Perth CBD is 5.5%. So it's quite high.
Yeah.
So if you've got a property, if you've got a unit or an apartment in the inner city area there, in the Perth CBD, yeah, it might be a bit tough for you at the moment.
Right. So before we wrap up, Peter, thanks for running us through so much today. Tell us a bit about your buyer's agency process and how you help property buyers with location and searching for properties and negotiating in due diligence and acquisition.
Yep. So look, I'm all about helping people make good property decisions. I had a meeting today with a potential client, wanted me to help him with negotiation on a property. I looked at the property and gave him 3 reasons why he should put an offer in. The easiest thing for me would have been to say, yep, no problem, take the job on, negotiate on his behalf. But I can't do that. I looked at it and said, this is not a good buy. I don't do it. And I gave him the reasons why. And he goes to me, well, thanks for that. I appreciate it. So he'll go back to speak to his wife and come back to me. Hopefully I can help them find something else which makes more sense. So it's important for me is to help people make good decisions. It's not all about just buying a property or negotiating. It's about finding the right property, the right price. I'm noticing at the moment there are a lot of the sort of the B and C and D grade properties. They've been around for a few years. They're resurfacing. So it's important to sort of steer clear of those. And there's reasons why they didn't sell in the past, and there's reasons why they won't sell now. So people are getting desperate, and it's really important that you need to step back a bit sometimes and have a good look and think, what am I trying to do here? What am I trying to achieve? What's my end product? What's my end goal? Sometimes when you're too close to it, at the moment, a lot of FOMO setting in. People are fearing missing out, so they're making sort of just snap decisions without having a good close look at it. So I'll look at all properties. I've got no emotion attached to what I'm buying. I'll look at it purely and say, right, is this a buy and hold? Is the live-in? Is the develop? And I'll take a step back and say, what's the end goal here? What's the end product? And try and give them a good understanding of if it makes good sense to what they're trying to do. The prices are very important because real estate agents don't always get it right. They'll appraise a property, put a price on what they think it's worth, which doesn't mean it's always correct. So it's very important to get an expert advice as to what that property is actually worth and what you should be paying for it. I'm hearing too often, especially at the moment because of shortages of stock. I was speaking to real estate agents saying, I've sold this property for X amount. And I said, really? That's crazy. I know they overpaid. And when a real estate agent tells you they've overpaid, that's a worry.
You really have. Yeah, you made some a range of really good points there. One is that it's not just about sometimes picking the right property. Sometimes the buyer's agent's role there is actually helping people to avoid making bad mistakes. So either by the due diligence process or just simply local knowledge. Exactly. Because if you've got buyers from interstate or they're moving across the city, a lot of stuff they may or may not know about the local area in terms of, who knows what, busy roads, flight paths, development approvals and so on. But also the negotiation and acquisition. There's a lot that a buyer's agent has access to as an industry professional in terms of sales databases, performing a comparable market analysis. There's loads of stuff that you guys can do that the everyday buyer who only buys a property maybe a few times in their life, they can't really do to the same degree. So obviously the negotiation and market analysis is a big part of it. And then just having a systematic process really just to go through when acquiring property to stop people getting overwhelmed by the whole process. So thanks very much for all your insights there, Peter. I think I should just say to finish up, just to give you a bit of an idea of the kind of services that we offer at buyersbuyers.com.au. So for people who want the full service buyers agency, we've got a package for every budget. But if you actually want the full search, you want somebody to help you with the strategy, to locate properties, and guys like Peter in Perth, the top buyers agents locally, they will know the local market inside out. That's definitely one way you can go. I think for auction, for auction bidding, which is less popular in Perth, and we do have a package for that. But also for people who are, especially first home buyers or people without the budget who just want help with the negotiation and acquisition and the due diligence. Then we also have an entry level product, which is much cheaper, just to help people through the process of buying the property. Because as I said, buyers agents do this stuff every day. But for most home buyers, it's only something that you go through a few times in your life. So it's definitely worth getting some professional help. And it's very often a cost neutral service because guys like Peter can actually negotiate much better than the average person can because they do it every day of the week. So I think that's it for today. So thanks, Peter, for joining us. If you've got any questions, feel free to shoot them through pete.wargent at buyersbuyers.com.au. You can also reach Peter at, now stop me if I get this wrong, Pete, but it's Peter at resolvepropertysolutions.com.au, is that right?
Correct. That's correct. Yep. Good job. Yep.
I
Good memory.
thought it'd be bound to stuff that up. So so drop us an email at those email addresses if you've got any other questions that we didn't cover. And we've actually taken a recording of today's webinar as well. So thanks for joining, everyone. Peter, thanks. It's been a pleasure. And if you want a copy of the video, we can send that out too. So cheers. Thanks very much.